it was coordinating across the departments, what are the risks being identified and managed. But before we'll start with the question, as usual, we'll do introduction.
Sure.
Deputy Ina Gardiner, President of Scrutiny Liaison Committee and Chair of the panel.
Deputy Hilary Jeune, Chair of the Environment, Housing, Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Montfort Tadio, Chair of the Economic International Affairs Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Louise Duvlay, Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Lucy Stevenson, the Vice Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and Chair sends her apologies.
Deputy Lyndon Farnham, Chief Minister.
Ian Gorst, Assistant Chief Minister.
Richard Dale, Treasurer.
Paul Wiley, Chief Officer of the Cabinet Office.
Jason Whitfield, Chief Information Officer.
Thank you. And Chief Minister, we'll start with very general question.
Sure.
Would you please tell us how your cross-government leadership contributed directly to the delivery of the 13 common strategic policy priorities?
Well, I think I've been absolutely clear from the time we formed the government, which could be described as a coalition government, because I think we needed to rebuild and find some unity. And we've worked extremely hard to build a political consensus. And I think that's been done through a number of reasons, but largely through, I think, a good government structure, a focus on not only our Council of Ministers meetings, but our the ministerial groups. We've also held a number of ministerial workshops dealing with the big issues from CSP to budgeting. Also, sorry, I've lost track.
Maybe you mentioned ministerial groups. Would you please state what ministerial groups do you have?
I had a list somewhere. They're all published on the website. Okay, here we are. Well, here are some. Emergencies Council, Regeneration Steering Group, Cost of Living Ministerial Group, the Gas Ministerial Group, Housing.
Just a bit. So, a Regeneration Steering Group, yeah.
Yeah, Cost of Living Ministerial Group, Gas Ministerial Group, Housing and Work Advisory Group, Ports Policy Ministerial Group, Legislation Advisory Panel. Not so much a ministerial group, but an important aspect of advising government. The Safeguarding Ministerial Group, Sports and Physical Activity Ministerial Group. And I was going to say before, as well as the ministerial workshops, as you all know, because you've all participated, we've had a number of full states member workshops as well, focusing on the bigger challenges. And on top of that, we have informal ministerial meetings on a regular basis, where we all discuss in a ministerial-only environment all aspects of the work that's going on.
When I'm looking through the Common Strategic Policy 13 priorities, will you please provide breakdown which are priorities receive funding to be delivered and which priorities didn't receive extra funding and needed to find the delivery of the priority within existing budgets?
Well, as far as I'm aware, all of the priorities have received the required budgeting to deliver in the CSP.
Attention, because when we had the public hearing with ministers previous week, and again, we might need to follow up with the written question to get the clarity.
Sure.
So, for example, the environment minister said that reform of planning service to get Jersey building, we needed to find within our budget. We didn't receive for this extra budget, and we needed to cancel, for example, water strategy. So they needed to do reprioritization. So they didn't receive extra budget for what is in common strategic policy.
Well, I think I'm not sure that a water strategy is relevant to the common strategic policy.
No. What I mean, each department has their business as usual. They had their work program, and when the common strategic policy was discussed, what else would be delivered? This is why my question was. So, for example, we know that extension childcare provider received extra funding because it wasn't part of their business as usual. So what in this case, when you formalize common strategic policy, was it clear that whatever you bring in as a part of common strategic policy would require extra budget, or you would thinking this is part of business as usual budget that departments? Was it discussion between ministers when you formalized
Yeah,
the
all of the common strategic priorities were at the forefront of our budgeting. So right through the budget debate, we focused upon making sure all of these priorities were sufficiently funded.
Chair, can I just ask?
Yes.
I think it's a supplementary. Is there a sense in which too much onus was put on individual ministers to come forward with bids, so that, and if that was the case, is there a risk that actually a strategic overview of what the important aspects that needed to be funded?
No, I don't think so, because, excuse me, I think soon after coming to office, we realised, this government realised, I realised after a couple of months, that the cost of running the public sector was unsustainable. I've said that repeatedly in time and time again, which is why when we came to the budgeting process, we were quite clear that we were not going to accept unsolicited growth bids, but we were going to focus on common strategic policies. And if there were requirements of any growth outside of that, then a strong case had to be made. That's different to how we've done it before. Before we would say, it's almost open season, fill your boots, come with all the growth bids, and then we'd debate it. But we did it in a more structured way this year. And we've got 11, well, the 13, the comment with the environment, the strategic priorities, because we felt we could deliver those within the 2-year period we had.
We did have a minister, for example, who said, like, you know, in hindsight, I felt that I was a bit naive because I should have maybe put bids in that I didn't. And there were strong advocates from other departments, you know, banging the table for their departments. Yeah. And it almost felt like the one who shouted loudest was getting the money. Is there a risk that that happens?
I don't think so. There's nothing to stop. I mean, I have regular and constructive discourse with ministers all the time. There's nothing to stop ministers coming back at any time if they have a problem or a challenge, or circumstances meant they want to change policy or change direction. They can come back at any time, and we'd go straight to council ministers. We can have that debate again.
Minister, Chief Minister, maybe there's an addition to that is about there's a common strategic priorities, but obviously you've got the risks and the wider areas that maybe cannot be planned for, and we're hearing regularly that now there are no budgets, there's no movement in those any budgets, or even in the future draft budget at the moment for contingency planning. So it will always be, there will be this issue where there will have to make very big choices on these particular cuts, on things that have to be done. And so that comes back to, and I think, you know, we've specifically seen that in our scrutiny panel around the Environment Minister, saying he's been unable, he will, you know, be unable to deliver areas of the work that he's statutorily obliged to do, areas that are imposed on him, like Brexit, reset negotiations. And how does this fit within the common strategic priorities? Because of course none of these that I've just mentioned are particularly in the common strategic priorities, but are absolutely necessary for a modern government to work and function.
Well, I have regular conversations with the Environment Minister. I spoke to him only yesterday. We were discussing you know, our approach to these scrutiny hearings, and he's always been he always, like every minister, I think every minister would want more budget if they could have it to focus on what they would like to do. I'm not aware that we are not able to deliver any of our regulatory functions due to budgetary constraints, and it's up to each minister to decide how, with their budgets, how they allocate it within their department. We know, I think it's been mentioned, that the environment budget has from 2021 to it's almost doubled. It's gone from 5 million to 11.1 million, which is proposed for 2026, and that's a significant increase. I also think we need to, and the Environment Minister, who's responsible for regulation, knows this because we have regular conversations. In actual fact, when I asked him if he would consider being minister, he asked me what I was expecting. And the key areas were to improve the planning service, reduce planning fees and reduce regulation wherever possible to make life easier for islanders and the economy. And I think he's done a great job to date, but of course he is, you know, every minister would like to go further, but we've got this juxtaposition. We know that we've presented a good balanced budget for 2026. And as Deputy Gorse referred to earlier, it's a bridging budget, really. It draws a line in the sand. It starts bearing down on expenditure, but it also recognises that we have to make big changes. So in one breath, we're saying we've got to cut back on expenditure, and then we have the juxtaposition of ministers and other states members saying we want more for this and more for that. Tough decisions to be made ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
The Minister for Children and Families has acknowledged that previous funding for children's services was spent ad hoc and not always in the best way. Given the scale of investment in recent years, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that future funding is properly planned, monitored and delivers measurable outcomes for children and families? And that's particularly because children is the first island outcome in the CSP.
Well, I am going to have to, I know you like Minister to answer, I'm going to have to refer to the Treasurer to that to explain the disciplines that are used in controlling departmental expenditure.
So, in terms of controlling that spend, and in particular in the first year of spend, that money agreed by the Assembly can only be spent on the aims which is purposed. Ideally, in the long term, what you would have is you have your business case at the start of it, you have a set of KPIs against which you ought to perform, and it is for each AO working with their minister to look to see what benefits are delivered against that business case. That's the norm. We certainly don't have the resources to be all over the top of that, but that's the expectation in terms of showing what benefits are realised for the expenditure that's there. It's fair to say that's getting more rigour within it. It's more difficult when you have very long-term business cases, if you like, for years of revenue spend. Firstly, to identify who are the people who were in place when they put that plan in place, to look to accountability. But secondly, to see what's happened in the meantime. But I would say that most of that investment that's been made should link back to the future Jersey outcomes and make contributions towards those. And there are some very key ones, particularly in education, that you can measure over time and within health. So that's the framework broadly around which initiatives should be assessed.
So internally, departments have their own, I think, like dashboard to measure things and outcomes, don't they? How often do those kind of insights go further? How often do they come to ministers, for example, to have that oversight as well?
So there's policy, which probably goes to the other end. I'll be corrected as I go with Paul. But a key point in time is when a new government comes in place, you'll be looking at priorities. You'll be looking to see how the previous term of office, and by that I mean an Assembly term of office, what has changed in that time frame. Have the programmes that have been in place contributed where they expected to contribute in the time frame to make the changes on what are after all very long-term indicators. That's a key point in time in terms of identifying the policy options and the priorities from incoming government. I guess Paul will go further if we've not covered that off.
Let's we'll move to the next one, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the theme of budget allocations and whether they flow from a coherent strategy across government, we heard from the hearing with the Treasury Minister this morning that individual ministers sent their bids in to Treasury and there were no joint bids from any ministers. And indeed, some of the groups that you mentioned, Chief Minister, including the Social Determinants of Health group, which includes the ministers for children, housing and social security. I believe that group hasn't yet met, and the cost of living group hadn't met for well over a year into your government. What have you learnt from your time as Chief Minister that you think could be improved in terms of the allocating budget allocations flowing from a central strategy and joint working around that?
I've learned that it's far more important to have robust debate around the Council of Ministers table and in ministerial groups rather than having partisan majorities trying to push policy and strategy through. This government's much more representative. It is by nature a consensus, a government. And it's, as a ministerial code said, we are bound by that code to bring policy and decision to Council of Ministers and have robust debate. And what I've also learned is that ministers have been particularly supportive, even when they're on the wrong side of a decision that Council of Ministers have made, to support that and go with it. And we've seen lots of examples of that. And I think we've got, whilst we don't always agree, and I always said disagreement is good because when we don't agree, we're forced to have much deeper and unfortunately much longer debates about things. But when we come to a consensus, we stick to it. And that was something I didn't think we'd ever get to. And so I've learned that spending the time to debate things more deeply, and even if you disagree, when you make a decision, we stick to it as a group, and that's seen us through to date very well.
Can I just, is that strictly true in terms of how we see a lot of votes where the Council of Ministers are split? So what's the decision-making process? You take a vote at council, and even if you disagree, then there's...
So we take a vote at council, and the majority wins, and we're quite often unanimous. It's when there are disagreements, it's normally 2 or 3. We don't have many split decisions, but when we do, we set up part of the leadership sort of approach we've taken is we have an agreed vote where the government will stick to that vote. We have a free vote, which are on issues such as elections or assisted dying. And then we have something called an agreement to differ. So if a minister feels strongly about something, can't support it, they note they're going to agree to differ when it comes to the state's debate. So there are no surprises. We're all notified of that. And we've seen that in practice, and that works well.
And that will happen in the budget, no doubt. There'll be amendments that come forward. That
we're not sure yet. At the moment, we're pretty aligned on everything. There are, I think, of course, there are questions. There are 2 or 3, I think, assistant ministers who the jury is out in relation to the reduction in the supplementation to the Social Security Fund, and we're having those conversations now. And of course, we'll approach every single amendment with an open mind, because it's important, and I want to make it absolutely clear, we're not dying the ditch over our budget. We've put down what we think is the best option for the next 12 months, given the challenges in the longer term, and we'll be open-minded. I'm sure you found us all the way through to amendments.
I'll go back to the cross-departmental work and your role as a Chief Minister in coordinating policies that touching across the departments.
Yeah.
We had examples from last week. For example, the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development has acknowledged there is no economic targets or projections have been developed to assess the impact of proposed 15 hours nursery provision.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the Social Security Minister and the Education Minister told that they talked how it can be delivered between 2 departments. So when we are hearing this, and in the hindsight, if we are looking back, do you believe that needs to be maybe a central function within the government which is responsible for assessing cross-cutting impacts of the policy proposal, because it can actually benefit the wider economy, not just before it reaches into the Council of Ministers and the Assembly?
Well, we try and do that with ministerial groups, but we could perhaps have more. I'm mindful that if we have too many ministerial groups, it's just not productive. So we generally use the Council of Ministers for that, and I think you could probably, if you go back and examine our agendas and minutes, you'll find we have a lot of agenda items, from the big policy items to sort of other items that might not ordinarily feature. And I encourage all ministers, if they're unsure, bring it to council of ministers. In addition to that, underpinning the political direction is the executive leadership team, where there is significant cross-cutting work. The executive leadership team meet regularly, more than monthly, I believe, where officers are discussing and working closely on the vast majority of issues we've identified.
But would you agree, for example, I understand that it's all, but would you agree in hindsight again, if I'm looking at extending nursery, it's under children, but when we did have a presentation, it's always been we have children going to nursery and it's benefiting children, but it also can benefit the economy. And would it be right that this policy would develop with two ministers coming together, obviously each one developing the policy within their department, but this crossover that have overarching benefit for the public?
In that particular instance, I go back to when we were formulating the Common Strategic Policy, when there was cross-cutting, when every single minister agreed and supported the extension of nursery care. It was discussed with business at that time through the Chamber of Commerce. I even remember talking about it in Chamber of Commerce meetings, Chamber of Commerce. So all of that work, and that was very well supported. The business sectors we had meetings at the time, Deputy Gorst and I, when we were talking about the Pillar 3 taxation, and we spoke to the big taxpayers, and they said they wanted to see some of our tax being used to facilitate people in the workplace, helping with nursery, helping with fees, education, help. So all of those conversations were held back.
But what would you suggest maybe for the next iteration of the Common Strategic Policy? Because, with that Common Strategic Policy, we've always learned the lessons. What would you add or suggest to the next Common Strategic Policy that would come based on your experience? How to coordinate these cross-cutting areas?
I always encourage, as I always have done, and before in previous lives as minister and assistant ministers, as collaborative working as possible. I always say to ministers, assistant ministers, not just between ministers and their assistant ministers, try and talk to each other, no surprises. There's lots of business as usual going on, and quite often ministers will go, would deliver business as usual, relatively minor items. We can't expect to talk to everything about everyone, but I would reiterate, and there has been some examples where if you're not sure, you're undecided, seek the support and advice of fellow ministers. So I think we're doing that well, but we can always,
But who needs to provide and drive this from the leadership perspective? Is it an officer level, or it's in the chief minister level, or if it's on deputy chief minister level, or it's each minister responsible for himself to drive this collaboration?
I would say every single state's member who's elected by the public has a duty of leadership.
No, but you have Common Strategic Policy. We're talking about collaboration your Common Strategic Policy.
I'm leading to that. So so that's my first point. And I think we all have a duty to do that. In relation to the Common Strategic Policy and how we put that together, I think where it helped us put that together, we were focused on things that we could deliver, were realistic. We didn't have a list of 100 things to deliver in 100 days and that kind of thing. We focused on the things we could get over the line in the remaining time we had left. So that was the driver. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to measuring outcomes, I'm afraid, Chief Minister.
Yes.
We know that Council of Ministers receive, I think, quarterly updates on the progress of items in the CSP. How is this government showing islanders that government's delivering on those commitments?
Well, I think the results have materialised in tangible ways. For example, the reduction in GP fees, the work on extending childcare, the school lunches, which was a piece of work we finished off from the previous government, and that's been very successful. And I think the others generally speak for themselves. We have kept our fees and duties and charges as low as possible. We have provided more affordable homes for Ireland through the Step Up scheme. So basically, the tangible evidence is in what's been delivered. In relation to how that's monitored for the quarterly updates, I'll have to ask Paul to tell you that, because he's responsible for that.
what you would have known from the the smaller communication structure that we now have is a concerted programme of communicating the CSPs throughout the year. So each month is a different theme, and as the Chief Minister said, several of them, as they were delivered, that's about telling your islanders and reminding them on things like school meals. But of others, in terms of the building the hospital, for example, it's as and when there's a relevant fork in the ground. So we've been very clear that, yes, we've got to deliver, but to your point, we also need to be telling islanders on progress, and that's a proactive campaign.
And is that a new campaign, or has that been an ongoing?
Been going on the whole time.
Okay, thank you. And then linking it to this proposed budget, how does this budget ensure the delivery of the CSP priorities and that they're sustainable and make a lasting impact beyond 2026, regardless of what happens at the next election and who the next government may be?
Well, because the funding required to maintain the progress in the CSP have been included in the departmental budgets.
For future years?
Well, so for next year, so at the moment, this is why I think we need perhaps to go back to 3-year budgeting. At the moment, we produce a budget for next year, and then we produce estimates for following that. But we know if we look back, those estimates tend to change every year as we adopt the budget. So they're in next year's budget, and then, of course, depending on the route we take, whether we go to 3-year budgeting or we stick with the forecasting programme, then they'd be reinstated in the following year, in the following budget, depending on the government. And actually, you could argue that having a 1-year fixed budget as opposed to a 3-year fixed budget is better in a year that's coming up to an election, because you could have a completely different government next year, and they can start from their position.
Chief Minister, do you, we will, I'm sure, come on to the Social Security Fund later on, but do you have, given your answer there and the question about sustainable funding for the CSP priorities, do you have any concerns that the funding as proposed in this budget is effectively coming from a temporary source from the fund? We keep being told by ministers that it's a temporary solution, but it's to fund ongoing investment in CSP priorities.
Yeah. So, I mean, the cost of the public sector is of great concern, the way it's grown exponentially to, I think, all of us. We've never made any, said anything else, and we've been watching that carefully, and that alone has led us to deliver the budget for 2026, which balances the books. It doesn't impact on the frontline services that we need to maintain, but it does rely upon a reduction in the grant to the Social Security Fund. And there are a number of reasons it was recommended that we could do that, not least because of the growth we've seen in the fund itself. And I'm looking for my figures here. Here we are. Yeah. So in 2006, the forecast of that fund would expire in 2034, and it would reach 4.7 times the annual spend. And it was those sort of forecasts that led to the formulas that have, what I would say has led the taxpayer to put in more supplementation than it needed to. In 2021, the forecast was that the fund would expire in 2026 and would reach over 7 times the annual spend. And that's roughly the position we find ourselves in now. So to be clear, this is a plan that balances the books for next year, okay, and allows this government and the next government time to consider how we address that. And the way we address that will be a mixture of further efficiency savings.
Just to clarify, 2066.
2066, what did I say?
Minister.
2066. Okay, so just very quick 10 seconds. We're going to have to look at taxation. We're going to have to look at revenues. We're going to have to look at more efficiencies, further tax cuts.
Growing the economy,
economic growth, and economic growth. It will be a blend of all of that.
Chief Minister, so you've mentioned this several times, and
Yeah.
it's been talked about a lot about the big growth in the public sector, and this is something that needs to be curbed. But we see the figures. The main figures are within health and education being the big chunk of where that growth has been. How does that balance when we see the common strategic priorities, and of course they all weigh differently. There's some that are easier in a way to deliver than others. Reducing GP fees is more of a change in negotiations than it is about delivering a hospital. Delivering a new hospital, of course, potentially, depending on how big it is, could increase the amount of public sectors, because it potentially will be a bigger hospital, will need more staff to run it and to provide the services within it. So potentially that could mean a growth in health, human resources. So how does that balance when we've got that narrative of an increased public sector? It seems to be big within health and education, and then the common strategic priorities in a way make sure that there is an increase, because you've got the extended nursery and childcare provision, which would mean more staff potentially in the public schools, in the schools and the state school system to support those nursery provisions, for example, or for the hospital, and so how does this balance out?
So it's, again, as we've always said or tried to say, it's about reprioritisation of how we spend our money. We've seen reductions in staff right across a number of core departments. But we've seen a net increase because we've thank you, Paul. So, Cabinet Office, Department for the Economy, Digital Services, Employment, Social Security, People Services, all have seen reduction in senior management. We've increased children and young people education by 75, healthcare by 234. We've reinvested that money in frontline staff, nurses, doctors, teachers, teaching assistants. What we hadn't done in past years. We'd allowed an imbalance. So part of that is addressing that. So we need a smaller government, smaller centre. We need to reinvest money in the front lines. But we have to try, instead of having we've seen a very slight net increase as we readjust. We need to manage that so we can see a sort of a net decrease.
It's also about the wage bill, presumably not just numbers of employees, it's about the affordability. And I suppose the flip side of that, we'll get to it later, but it's cost of living. So it's a very fine equation, presumably, is it, in terms of economic growth, cost of living, and
we had an adjustment. We managed to just make the finishing step. The previous government very close to it. We inherited a teacher strike, but we resolved that fairly quickly. We had to, with the pay deal with the public sector, there were years where the public sector pay had fallen below inflation. So with the cost of living deal, with the 1% increase, that's put everything back on track. But so by the end of this term, public sector and all public sector employees, that situation has been resolved. So really, the headcount where we invest our resources is really important. I think we should focus on the front lines, and I think we need to go a lot further in reducing management layers.
Chief Minister, but I know that we touched about the Social Security Fund, but I'm talking about 25, because in this budget, you're requesting extra 50 million to meet unexpected spending in 2025. And from my understanding, this 50 million for 2025, because we had less income than we expected, the inflation was high. It means that the pay for the staff, for the public service, was higher than you predicted, and obviously overspent in health. So after improving the budget, we're having now extra 15 million requested to reducing grant. What assurance can you tell that 70 plus million reducing grant in 2026 will not turn into 100 million requests the year after?
Well, based upon our year-to-date figures and our constant re-estimating and forecasting, we've arrived at the best position. I think there can be no guarantees in this unstable world. What we have learnt is, and what, as as the Treasurer said earlier, we have become, I think, a lot more focused on discipline around the expenditure in budgets.
But this is why I'm asking, because the 2025 budget, as the budget was proposed, the budget was approved by the Assembly. It's never come back to the Assembly that actually we are overspending. We need extra 50 millions to balance the book in 2025 because of the circumstances, and we just received it now. So and I assume it's something coming into the common strategic policy priorities as well to cover, because it's health and it's other things. So it's, for us, if it is discipline, I think the public would like to have a reassurance. We had a cut of 10 million, but now we're actually cutting input for 60 million for 2025 and going forward. So this is where, how sustainable it's going forward.
I think it is sustainable. I think it relies upon strict controls. We have to understand there are influences and actions outside of our control that affect us, such as the underlying rate of inflation globally has had a massive impact on the cost of health supplies, health services that are provided to the island. It's also had an impact upon our state of the economy. The global economy has had an impact upon taxation and business performance. The important thing is we just keep as tight a control as we possibly can, and I think we've seen that improve significantly. And I would hope the Treasurer, although he is very careful and quite rightly cautious, I'd hope he feels more confident in relation to our forecast. Given the caveat, nothing is ever guaranteed.
Yeah, well, let's move. Okay, thank you. It's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of the public sector overspending, which the fiscal policy panel has described as not prudent, and Chief Minister, you've described the solutions to that will be a combination of growth and some savings and possibly revenue raising. But why has this government not tackled this question of where the solutions lie on those three options?
Well, I think we have. Firstly, the FPP report was not all bad. There were some really positive points in there. It talked about our strong financial services sector, our resilient tax revenues, our commitment to capital investment through the Investing in Jersey programme, our recognition of inflationary risks which we're dealing with in our forecasting, focus on health forecasting, the complete health review, and the reality based around what we're dealing with the underlying rate of inflation in the provision of health, and our efficiency saving targets. Those were all highlighted as very positive moves. And then I'm very pleased that they highlighted the unsustainability of the public sector model at the moment. That's something we can't fix in a year. It's something that's going to take years to do.
Is there a plan that will take us across the bridge, as it were, in terms of whether it's growth, cuts or revenue raising?
This is what we've been doing with the ministerial workshops, with the States members workshops, focusing on all the big issues. We've got a final workshop in February where we tie all that together. And then this government will present, hopefully with the support of the states, because it's the States members workshops that have pointed us in the right direction. We will present a blueprint, a plan for moving forward, which we will leave on the table for the next Assembly and the next government.
Can you give us an idea of what might
Well,
be?
we're working on it now, but I'll go back to what I said and what Deputy Gore said before. We're going to have to look at more efficiencies. We're going to have to look at reprioritising services, where we reprioritise spend between the centre and frontline services. We're going to have to look at our tax structures. We're going to have to look at revenues, whether we can explore other revenues. And we're going to have to, I think, importantly, look at the economy and growing the economy. It will be a blend of all that, but because it's a work in progress, we can't tell you that. But
what tax structures do you think you'll need to look at?
Well, I'm not sure. We made it clear when we came into government we weren't going to increase taxation, but we've got to look at the services we need to supply into the future. We need to understand whether our levels of taxation are appropriate. I think they are. I think we shouldn't need to change taxation. I think what we have works well. but there's a debate on progressive tax and regressive tax. We've got a GST. Thank goodness, at the end of the day, whilst I wasn't keen at the time on GST, that's been absolutely important. We might look at how we distribute that, and we could look at revenues. For example, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of electric cars driving around that aren't paying road tax at the moment. So there are all sorts of options to consider, but there's no easy answer.
Chief Minister, one of the CSP areas was also about the ageing population, and how is the government ensuring this implications of the ageing population are fully embedded across the common strategic policies? So it's not just healthcare, but it's across economic, housing, infrastructure. How is these taken into consideration?
I think it's that was part of the incentive for the Investing in Jersey programme. And it's part of Deputy Gardner's P50 a proposition. We've underinvested in infrastructure because we've not rigorously protected it. A key part of our Investing in Jersey plans are the provision of additional sheltered housing for the elderly and so forth. So that's our predominant.
And is there a particular, like a working group that's working on this, or is there specific strategic leadership that looks at it from this angle?
So I think at the moment the Investing in Jersey proposals are in. We're providing, there's law drafting going on around the investment fund. Once that's approved, if it's approved, we don't want to take the states for granted. If that's all approved as part of the budget, then we move to the next stage of how we manage that. And I think every government that comes in has to look at its ministerial portfolios, and we might see some changes. I would think in the next government, then we perhaps need to put more ministerial focus on infrastructure and ageing population.
And demographics, it's under your remit, Chief Minister. So what work streams do you specifically work on under ageing population? Is there something that you particularly work on in this area?
Well, most of my work has been based around in this area around the investing in Jersey strategy and the healthcare spend. I think also areas about how we might use technology. That's part of the increase in the health budget, of how they want to use that to benefit health, social inclusion.
It's just, Minister, because the CSP says we will make preparations for our projected demographic changes, including our ageing population, falling birth rate, rising levels of disability, to ensure sustainability of our health provisions, protect economic prosperity. So it was just trying to find out where where yourself fits in with that work streams and the preparations.
Okay, so you mean outside of the Ageing Well roadmap type thing? You're talking more of the fiscal sort of... And that,
well, it's still within the ageing population. I think this focuses on that demographic change, which we know is going towards an ageing population.
When we refer to ageing population, it's well-being, Ageing Well roadmap, provision of facility services, infrastructure for that. But of course, the other challenge, the economic challenge, is the impact of tax revenues from an ageing population, shrinking workforce, falling birth rate. So
I would ask you the same question that I asked previously, Treasury Minister. I think what we are hinting at, there is completely right. There is very good that you have the infrastructure investors, but it's one part. Other part is the health provision, what will the ageing population demographic change will require. There is different arrangement for the social security, pension plus, etc. support that you have. Mm-hmm. There is, so we're talking about this demographic change that coming across several departments. Mm-hmm. And as in the common strategic policy, we'll make preparation, which will include economic prosperity and health provision, not just infrastructure. What we're trying to understand, do you have a cross-government work stream that bringing all these departments together? And if not, do you think it's something that needs to happen in the next government?
Yeah, we do that through the Haywag Plus group, as we call it, where we're looking at all demographics, all economic aspects of those demographics. I think there needs to be a lot more synergy between that. We tend to look at them in isolation at the moment. I think there's there's a blending of that. So of course that work's being done through HAWAG Plus and HAWAG with the population policy.
But do they discuss health policy and health provision for the aging population with this with the
Absolutely, we do,
industry?
yeah,
Okay. So we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we touched on it earlier. There's some questions about the cost of living. Is tackling cost of living issues still a priority for your government?
I think it's the biggest priority, but also probably the most difficult to grapple with, given the levers we have at our disposal. And that will be a big part of the plan we put before the Assembly, our end of term report, if you like, as we head into the next elections. I think the biggest problem, well, one of the biggest problems or concerns for islanders at the moment is about the affordability of living. It's not unique to Jersey. We're seeing it, all over the Western world, basically. Yeah. You would have paid particular interest to the New York result of the mayor of New York elections, and that was a key. Big cities are facing all of these problems. That's something we are grappling with, but it's high on the agenda, and we're determined to keep working on that.
I mean, Chief Minister, it's not a question on the paper, but I mean, are you concerned about the knock-on effect that the lack of a joint tender process has had on food prices in the island? It's presumably
No,
less lucrative.
I'm not overly so, because based on the advice we've received, I think the good economic advice and the calculations we've seen, food inflation, the vast majority of food inflation is not related to the cost of freight. I don't have the percentages in front of me. I think we have more work to do on how the food gets from the ship to the shelf, and that's where we're on.
But it's presumably much more expensive for a boat to run to one island than to two, less lucrative.
Well, I mean, the economies of scale will always apply, but when you go to two islands, you have two sets of port charges, you have more logistics, you require more crew, more facilities. Arguably, a ship coming from A to B, and B to A, and A to B could be more productive, but I don't know what the current freight levels are in Guernsey and how that works out. What I do know is that DFDS have produced a business plan and have signed an agreement that commits them to investing £300 million in new ships, and whichever way we do it, it's still a lucrative business.
And in terms of other parts of the economy, the Business Tendency Survey shows that 54% of businesses identify as having staff or skill shortages as one of their main constraints. Is there something that can be done in the CSP to address these risks?
Well, there's work, lifelong learning. I mean, Minister Deputy Ward was very keen to emphasise when the change of his department was education and lifelong learning, because we recognise the potential for not keeping up and offering the skills and training development. Again, I mean, we've had a number of major events happened over the years, from COVID to Brexit, that has led to a completely different makeup of our workforce, which has made it more challenging to deliver that cohesively, but it's still a high priority.
In terms of the joined-up thinking, I mean, if we think about immigrant labour into Jersey, often the term used is unskilled labour, but actually within the unskilled labour market, so-called, there's a lot of skills that are there. There's a lot of education that has gone into bringing people to Jersey. Do you think that there's enough being done between the different departments to make sure that skills, especially when it's imported, when they're imported skills, are being matched up with the right
I've been
jobs?
I've been particularly impressed with the work between education, economy, Highlands College, and I spent a morning up there recently and was completely surprised, very pleasantly surprised at the level of support and training that's given there. But yes, could we always do more? Of course we can always do more. And I don't think there's any such thing as really an unskilled job. I think every job requires an element of skill.
And can I also ask about where digital figures into the lifelong learning strategy? Do you accept that digital, improving digital skills is fundamental to the island's future?
I think it is absolutely essential. I mean, just about everything all of us do all the time is digitally based now.
Okay. And so regarding the proposed investment in the budget, what emphasis is being given to maintaining core digital infrastructure versus investing in innovation and transformation? So, for example, AI, automation, etc. Is that something that this budget
So we have
focuses on?
two approaches to that. We have the internal approach about how we're introducing AI and improving digital skills within the public service to make us more productive. And if you want to ask any questions, Jason can give any commentary on that. But on time, we can provide you with more information on that. And then through our investment via the economy department, we are working with Digital Jersey, and I know there's been some interesting discourse about AI, but where I am encouraged is all of the vast majority of businesses, especially the larger businesses, are investing heavily in technology and AI, but we need to provide, I think, more support where required to the smaller businesses and sole traders and conversations. we have
Chief
to have.
Minister, thank you for your extensive answers. My question, would you be able to give us extra 10 minutes?
Of course I can.
Thank you.
Considering, well,
So,
Can I just
and I'll
ask-
make the
Yeah.
answers less extensive.
Can I ask a final question, Chair, on
If
digital?
so, I should check with my colleagues if.
I won't use up all the 10 minutes. Just a final question on this area. Is there a risk that when it comes to digital skills and upskilling that either there's duplication going on between government, for example, and Digital Jersey, or actually perhaps also likely that that digital skills fall between two stools and that there might be areas where neither is really picking up the demand or latent demand in the economy?
Well, I haven't seen any evidence of that because digital skill training is of such high importance to the economy. The vast majority of businesses prioritise it, and the vast majority of training is carried out in-house. That doesn't mean we don't need to provide more. And again, we look to Digital Jersey for that. And again, they need to.
But that's fine if you're already in a job. But what about if we're talking about reskilling for people without the skills who maybe want to move into digital jobs later on in life? How do they go about retraining?
They would look for training through the private sector, through Highlands College, which is subsidised, of course, in certain areas.
And you're confident that the funding is sufficient in that area?
At the moment, I am. I mean, I don't know if Jason can add anything to that. If you've got, can do it quickly.
Yeah, pleased to. So as part of the IT strategy that we presented to a number of committees, one of the key initiatives is a skills academy, and that will definitely pull on the areas that you're talking to, from outside of government, from inside of government, people who want to transfer in to develop digital skills. And we're doing that in alignment with all the planning for AI. Correct.
So that's nothing to do with Digital Jersey, that's separate.
That's focused on internal technology skills that we need for government IT, government services.
so you're creating skills academy within the government structure now?
It's an initiative as opposed to a function or a department.
Initiative. So you have digital academy within the government. Okay.
It's a plan at the moment developing. My ambition would be for Digital Jersey to support us, Skills Jersey, Highlands. I mean, we'd pull on all parts of the greater public sector for it. But the focus is to develop government IT skills so that we're less reliant on third parties.
Okay. But that's just an internal, I say just an internal thing.
Will involve external partners.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
and with how that develops,
Well, I think we'll ask about that in another forum, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that will. Thank you for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Minister, in the hearing with corporate services, there was some discussion on inclusion and equity, and I think an agreement that hadn't been embedded sufficiently. Is this something that you will be recommending in your legacy document that you mentioned, and what form do you think that should take?
Well, I think after our last panel hearing, officials provided you with the ministerial submission template and its corresponding guidance, which you've had, which shows how we're addressing the DICUs and at the earliest policy stages, and the collaboration, for example, between IOD and Mind the Gap in developing the gender pay gap toolkit, for example, is something that we've.
Sure, but what might that look like? What might the best kind of ideal situation look like in terms of government structure and cross-working to make sure that inclusion and equity is thought at the earliest point?
Do you know, I don't know what that looks like, if I'm honest. I really don't know. I mean, the will is there from all of us to make sure we get to the right, most equitable position we possibly can. And we've worked, I mean, I have to pay tribute to IOD and Mind the Gap team for guiding us on that. So if I can just be honest, I don't know what that looks like, but rest assured we want to get to the right place.
Do you think there should be a minister around the table with responsibility for that? Who should be raising that?
I think there could, you know, we could put more focus in a ministerial portfolio. I don't know if it warrants an individual minister, but certainly we need to look at how that's politically represented.
Thank you. And the equality impact evaluation document that you mentioned, how was that used to shape the CSP and the budget allocations?
May I ask Paul to take that one?
Yeah, so for example, when devising some of the growth items like children's childcare, it goes through that process, and the policy officers use that template. They refer to the guidance and make sure at the earliest stage that we are considering these issues in terms of gender and the other identity characteristics.
Thank you.
I'm feeling a bit guilty because Ian's not getting any questions.
I think I've said enough today, Chief Minister.
Hearing from the Chief Minister.
Oh, okay. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy
Nice.
to answer any questions.
It
We
was
have
worth-
two
it
more
was worth a
quick
try.
areas to
Yeah.
touch on.
Be careful
Yeah.
what you wish for.
And just very
Yeah.
quickly, as a follow-up on there, would you support the introduction of gender-responsive budgeting, Chief Minister?
Well, I support the principle. I mean, I definitely support the principle of that, and we're trying to move towards that. But I think there's more work to do.
Thank you. We did say we'd come back to the Social Security
Yes.
Fund, so I'm going
Yeah.
to move on to that just quickly. The Fiscal Policy Panel in its report recently described the proposed temporary reduction in the state's grant to the Social Security Fund as not prudent, I think were the words. What's your response to that?
Well, I think we are being prudent. Unfortunately, I understand the FPP panel haven't had sight of the actuarial letter and advice we received, and I'm also understood that they didn't see the Treasury forecasts and Treasury advice we received. So I need to speak to the chair of the panel about that. Whether that would have made any difference to their recommendations, I'm not sure. I think we have been prudent in presenting the budget that we have done for the reasons we've outlined in this meeting, and some of that area was covered in the previous hearing with the Treasury Minister and Assistant Treasury Minister. And we've provided a budget to balance the books. We've based it upon a very, very healthy fund that's grown exponentially in recent years and can comfortably afford to do this because it's in a much stronger position than we perhaps could have ever imagined 3 or 4 years ago. But it is, as the Treasury Minister alluded to earlier, it is a temporary position insofar as we're proposing it for next year's budget, pending the full actuarial review, which will be published next year. Now, depending on what that says, we can then act accordingly on that, and that will blend into the plan we're producing on how we deal with our financial challenges.
You say that the panel didn't have access to some documents. They're quite important documents in that process. Why didn't they have access?
I can't answer that question. I was informed this morning that, and I wanted to speak to the the chair of the panel to get his view on it. But I think it was important that they saw the advice we did receive, because we have had actuarial advice.
It's published.
It's published. We've got more advice coming before the budget, and we've got a full review next year. But as I said, there's no criticism of the panel. I welcome their report, and absolutely we all agree. I want to be this clear: next year's budget is sustainable for 2026. Balances the books. I think it's responsible in maintaining services. We have efficiencies. We have we are curbing the. I can just be quick. The recruitment freeze at certain grades and the restriction on consultancy has saved us about £50 million since we took office. Okay, and if we hadn't have done that, we'd be looking at a position that could be up to £50 million worse off than we receive now.
I mean, what will happen if the review come back and actually saying that the fund is not sustainable, but you put 4 years budget in for services that promise to the public based on the funds that should go into the Social Security Fund? If the review will come back and said, actually, because of the low income, because of the less working population, because of the increase of the pension liabilities, because we don't know what our liabilities currently via investment, if the next year review is coming back and saying it's not sustainable, and what we would need to do, we need to find some way 50 million that was already promised to the public.
I prefer it if you asked me what would we do if they came back, if the performance was actually much better than we expected.
I would be very pleased and I would be very happy and I will support, I would like to see it, but I think to be prudent, it means also to ask question, why if not?
I know, I understand that. And two things. First of all, that's why it's essential this government delivers a plan, a proposed direction of travel for the next assembly. But if that happens, then we're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. We're going to have to balance. We're going to have to look at our income forecast, and then we're going to have a look what opportunities we have for revenue and what further opportunities we have for efficiencies. Very difficult choices, but I'm confident we can get through it. Because can I just say, outside of these challenges, we are fortunate that we do have strong reserves. Notwithstanding, we used up all of our short-term reserves during COVID. But we can't rely on those for too much longer. We have to change the position.
I appreciate the points that are being made. All of those things, waiting for a full actuarial review and setting up a new government in the first place, and then going through and looking at savings, consulting with the public, growing the economy, they all take time. What is a realistic timescale for that?
Well, we have this government will deliver its report in prior to the elections in June. The elections take place, the new government will be formed. They create their CSP, and then the big challenge, I think, is how we deal with the budget next year for 2027, and that will depend on a number of factors. It will depend on the economy, the rate of inflation, the our revision of income, how much money we get in from Pillar 2. Now we've budgeted 50 million. We might get less. We might get more. We don't know. But at least at the time when we're doing that work, or the new government is doing that, the new assembly is doing that work, they'll have more up-to-date information to base their decisions on.
Okay, thank you. And just last few questions around the legislative programme. And how does the current legislative programme affect the priorities set out in the CSP?
Well, we've tried to focus our legislative priorities around CSP, but over and above that, our working group regularly convene to monitor prioritisation, and we work with other ministers and other groups to try and to put to create the right balance. I mean, and make sure in what we have in our programme is deliverable. And I think one of the big examples of that is the amount of resource we put into the Violence Against Women and Girls review, where we accepted all of that, and that's probably the bulk of it. I don't know if Paul wanted to add anything quickly.
An extra, what mechanisms are there to track that? Because of course we've had, since those decisions and since the CSP, there's been additional legislative work being added as well. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
There's been a lot we've seen that's not anything related to the CSP. So
We always keep a bit of reserve space for any surprises, last minute changes, any urgent legislation we need. But
And in devising its common strategic policy, the Council of Ministers were very aware they had 2 years, and in the main, legislation takes about 18 months. So we were looking at other levers to deliver those CSP items. That said, Jim is absolutely right. You've got the Violence Against Women and Girls, you've got the residential tenancy law, and these are examples where it did actually require a legislative change. But in the main, the CSP, it was about getting on with delivery, getting the cash, and getting things done. So the legislative programme, we manage more generally to make sure that all of those items can get through, trying to balance demand and capacity with our drafting colleagues.
and just as we're coming to the end of the term, will all those CSP priorities in the legislative perspective be achieved before the end of this term? Is there any risk to that?
So I meet with the Law Officers Department and the Legislative Drafting Office, and I convene all of our kind of policy colleagues across government. Our programme is still sound at present. You can never be 100% about these things because the nature of drafting is it throws up things you weren't expecting. But certainly the common strategic policy legislative items I've no concerns about.
yeah.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask, I suppose, a summing up question, but not necessarily the final one, is about the...
Final one, final. Okay.
I don't mean this in a critical way. You've touched on the economy, but I've not heard a lot about productivity and economic growth in terms of the third way of getting out of future financial trouble. So instead of taxing or cutting,
Well,
what steps is this government taking to make sure, for example, tourism, that we see a revival in tourism?
I'm pleased to speak about this because, as you know, we worked out 8 years as Economic Development Minister. Best 8 years of my life so far, apart from the last 2, of course. But, I mean, you could argue we were in slightly easier economic times than it was pre-COVID, pre-Brexit, and, you know, the world order was in better shape. In relation to tourism, I'm pleased to see significant extra funding has been provided to Visit Jersey. And I know there's a proposal to consider putting some more into that, which the Economic Development Minister is considering. We're not alone in our challenges with tourism. Most of the UK was down. I think the Republic of Ireland was down about 30%. EasyJet were offering £30 return flights to Spain in August from the UK. It's a very challenging market. I think there are some optimistic signs. For example, I'm pleased to see that DFDS timetables and bookings opened the earliest they've ever opened. And when I last spoke to them, there'd been about 25,000 bookings already for next year. I think that will help significantly. I think, and then it's down to the economy team, the minister working with Visit Jersey and their other stakeholders to see how they can grow that. Of course, the rest of the economy relies on, I think government just stepping back a bit more. I've said it time and time again. I think we overregulate ourselves in many areas. Planning, of course, this is no criticism of the relevant ministers of all the departments. They all do really good work. But if we're serious about this, we need to look at how we regulate, how we enable businesses and the economy to grow. And then, of course, something I think that's very positive is the work that Deputy Gorst is leading on ensuring we have a good, strong financial services sector for the years ahead. But you're going to want to question him about that in a different hearing.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your extra time.
Thank you.